Chapter 291. I walked into Class 2A, a place that felt both familiar and strangely distant after my 5-week absence. The 10 seats, arranged in their usual 2x5 format, were all occupied by the Academy's most exceptional students. As I stepped in, I felt a few gazes turn my way. The air was charged with a mixture of curiosity and surprise. My return clearly hadn't gone unnoticed. The classroom itself was unchanged. The same reinforced walls designed to withstand errant bursts of mana. The same advanced holo displays at the front. The same faint scent of energy-infused cleaning agents used to remove the occasional scorch marks or frost patterns. It was comforting in its predictability. "Arthur?" Lucifer greeted me first, his verdant eyes glinting with curiosity. His silver-white hair was slightly longer than when I'd last seen him, falling just above his shoulders now. "I heard you were in a coma. What happened?" I took my seat beside him, the rank 1 seat, still mine after all this time. It was strange how important such a small thing could feel. "Had a run-in with a bishop," I said, leaning back casually. "He was injured, so I managed to survive." Lucifer blinked. "Wait, actually? You fought a bishop?" I nodded, watching his reaction carefully. His usual calm demeanor cracked for a moment as his eyes widened slightly. Even he, the hero, was surprised. The flicker of genuine shock on his face was almost worth the near-death experience. I smirked a little. In the original story, Lucifer's first real battle against a bishop came when he was a high integration ranker, a moment that solidified his legend. And yet, here I was, having done it without even reaching integration rank. Of course, he ended up defeating the bishop alone with the bishop at full power, while I had barely survived a wounded one. "As expected, you're incredible," Lucifer muttered, shaking his head slightly before resting his chin on his hand. There was genuine respect in his voice, tinged with something that might have been concern. "Says the guy who's already integration rank." I could feel the shift in his mana. He had fully stepped into that level while I was still lagging a step behind. The difference was subtle but unmistakable, like comparing a burning candle to a small bonfire. It was only a matter of time before he left me in the dust if I didn't push myself harder. Before I could say anything, a loud voice interrupted us. "Arthur. Long time no see, man." Ian Vizirian strode up with a wide grin, clapping me on the shoulder with enough force to make me wince slightly. The dragon-blooded prince radiated warmth, both metaphorically and literally. His mana always carried a heat to it, like standing too close to a furnace. His crimson hair seemed to glow under the classroom lights, catching fire with every movement. "Glad to see you're still alive," he added, shaking my hand with a strong grip that would have crushed the fingers of anyone with lesser physical enhancement. "Of course," I said with a chuckle. "It'll take more than a bishop to get rid of me." "That's the spirit." Ian laughed, his voice filling the classroom. "Next time, let me in on the fight, yeah? My flames could have helped. Would have roasted that bishop nice and crispy." I smiled but didn't say anything. If Ian had been there, it would have turned into a full-blown battlefield. The last thing I needed was another future Radiant ranker getting dragged into my mess. Besides, Ian's idea of help usually involved reducing everything within a half-mile radius to smoldering ash. "Seriously though," he added, his tone dropping slightly as he leaned in. "You good? Heard you were pretty messed up." "I'm fine now," I assured him. "Just needed some time to recover." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. "Well, don't go hogging all the glory next time. Some of us want a crack at those cult bastards too." As Ian and Lucifer continued talking, I glanced around the classroom, taking stock of my other classmates. Rinkagu was watching me, not in an obvious way, but his violet eyes lingered on me longer than necessary before he turned his attention back to his notebook. He never said much, and right now was no exception. His white hair fell across his face, partially obscuring his expression, but I caught the calculating gleam in his eyes. He was analyzing me. Ren wasn't like the others. He didn't waste time on small talk or pleasantries. He watched, calculated, and waited. And then there was Klana. As usual, she was sleeping, head down, arms crossed, her slow, steady breathing making it clear she had absolutely no intention of participating in whatever chaos the rest of us were stirring up. Her long navy blue hair spilled across her desk like a curtain. No one questioned it anymore. We just accepted that Klana operated on a different plane of existence than the rest of us. And well, I didn't have to mention Jean, who was pointedly ignoring me. Then there were the 4 girls, Rachel, Cecilia, Serafina, and Rose. They kept stealing glances at me when they thought I wasn't looking. Cecilia was the most obvious, turning fully in her seat to flash me a brilliant smile. Rachel was more subtle, watching me from the corner of her eye with that familiar smirk playing on her lips. Serafina maintained her usual composure, but her ice-blue gaze lingered a moment longer than necessary. And Rose seemed to be trying very hard not to look at me at all, which only made her furtive glances more noticeable. I sighed. Some things never changed. It was good to be back, despite everything. The familiarity of these rivalries, friendships, and whatever complicated thing I had with the four girls was oddly comforting after weeks of recovery. Finally, the door slid open as Professor Nero stepped inside. Conversation immediately died down, everyone straightening in their seats, except Clanna, who continued to sleep peacefully. Ian moved back to his seat as the professor reached the center of the front of the class. Nero looked exactly as I remembered him, immaculately dressed in the Academy's official instructor uniform. His gray hair neatly trimmed, his posture rigid with military precision. The only sign of the passing weeks was perhaps a few more lines around his eyes. "Welcome back, everyone," he said, his eyes turning to me, lingering for a moment with an unreadable expression. "And especially you, Arthur. I hope your fall break was fulfilling." There was a hint of dry humor in his tone that wasn't lost on me. My fall break had involved a coma and extensive healing. Hardly fulfilling in the traditional sense. "Now, as you know, we have two main events this half of the semester," Nero continued, activating the holo display with a gesture. A calendar materialized in the air, key dates highlighted in glowing red. "We have your second practical evaluation, which will technically be your third mission that you will undertake. And we have the Inter-Academy Festival." The mention of the festival caused a ripple of excitement through the class. The annual competition between the world's top academies was a prestigious event, one that attracted attention from the highest levels of government and military. "Your second practical evaluation will be in 2 weeks, so you don't have much time till that," Nero warned, his expression growing more serious. "This time, you will be taking more dangerous missions near the borders." "Near the borders?" Rachel repeated as Nero nodded. Everyone's expressions darkened. The atmosphere in the room shifted, the earlier excitement replaced by tension so thick you could almost taste it. After all, the borders being mentioned by Nero were the borders between the continents and the lands ruled by miasmic beasts and the cults. These weren't just geographical boundaries. They were front lines in humanity's ongoing war against extinction. "Yes, the borders," Nero confirmed, his voice taking on a harder edge. "The Academy believes that after your 2 mission experiences, you're ready for more challenging assignments. You will be operating in teams of 2 to 3, with support from regular military units, but your objectives will be independent." "Will we choose our own partners?" Lucifer asked, glancing around the room. Nero shook his head. "Partners will be assigned based on complementary abilities, and your individual performance metrics from previous missions. We're looking to balance strengths and compensate for weaknesses." Chapter 292. So it was time. I leaned back slightly, watching as Nero explained the details of the third mission, his voice crisp and authoritative as it cut through the tense silence of the classroom. The holographic display behind him showed maps of various conflict zones, shifting and highlighting as he spoke. The front lines. This mission was a significant step up from the last 2. Mythos Academy students would be deployed into actual battle zones, real wars against real enemies, not simulations or controlled engagements. The stakes were higher, the dangers more immediate, and the consequences far more permanent. I already knew what was coming. In the novel, this was where Lucifer made a name for himself, taking down a high integration rank orc in single combat and earning even more widespread recognition for his strength. It was a pivotal moment in his rise to prominence, one of the first stepping stones on his path to becoming the legendary hero who would eventually challenge the demon overlord himself. I glanced at him. The current Lucifer was even stronger than the one in the novel, his mana signature already settling into the pattern's characteristic of low integration rank. That fight would be easier than ever for him, perhaps even disappointingly so. His verdant eyes were focused on the display, absorbing every detail with the calm assurance of someone who never doubted his own abilities. "As you all know," Nero continued, his sharp eyes scanning the room, lingering momentarily on each face as if assessing our readiness, "there are 3 major continental front lines. We are pushing all of you out of your comfort zones, so you won't be deployed to your home continents." It was a reasonable approach. 7 of the 10 students in this room were either princes or princesses. If they were sent to their own territories, they'd receive royal treatment, making the mission pointless. They'd be protected, coddled, kept safely away from any real danger. That wouldn't serve the Academy's purpose. Because of this, here are the decided groups, Nero said as the display behind him lit up with new information, names and destinations appearing in crisp, glowing text. I shifted my gaze to the holographic screen, studying the assignments with interest. Northern Continent, Jean, Ian, Cecilia. Southern Continent, Serafina, Lucifer, Ren. Western Continent, Arthur, Clanna, Rachel, Rose. I tilted my head slightly. Rachel and Rose were with me. Not bad. The rest of Mythos Academy students will also be deployed, but in separate zones from you within the same continental front line, Nero added, his finger tracing the map to indicate the broader deployment strategy. You will be working with local forces to support their ongoing efforts. I tapped my fingers against the desk, deep in thought. The Western Continent, that meant facing the forces of ogres and orcs that had been waging war for decades. The Western Front was known for brutal, grinding combat, less about finesse and more about raw power and endurance. The enemies there were physically stronger than humans, with thick hides that could resist conventional weapons. Your specific objectives will be provided upon arrival, Nero continued, his tone growing more severe. But I can tell you now that these won't be simple search and destroy missions. You'll be expected to integrate with the command structure, understand the strategic situation, and make meaningful contributions to the overall war effort. Ian raised his hand. Professor, how long will we be deployed? 1 week, Nero replied. You'll be departing next week. As Nero continued outlining logistical details, my mind was already racing ahead, formulating plans, considering contingencies. The Western Continent presented unique opportunities, and not just for combat experience. The classroom was dimly lit, and not just because someone forgot to tell the lights to do their job. It was by design. The air itself seemed to buzz faintly with something uncomfortably close to dread, like the scent of ozone before a storm, or perhaps the smell of burning coffee right before an exam. I stepped in and found my usual seat at the front, which is where all the people with something to prove tend to sit. Today, though, there were 3 upper-year students already in the room. They weren't being loud or intimidating, which somehow made them even more so. One of them had silver tattoos curling down his arm like a spell that regretted being cast. Another wore a visor that filtered light like his eyes didn't quite agree with how photons worked. The third just radiated the quiet menace of someone who knew they were better than you and didn't need to say it out loud. Professor Helvane arrived 2 minutes late. Welcome, she said, her voice somehow smooth and sharp at the same time. Today, we begin your formal instruction in deep dark manipulation. She walked to the front of the class and tapped the desk. A hologram bloomed to life in the air. Deep dark, she continued, is not a sub-element. It is mana pushed beyond its limits. Dark mana compressed and warped so densely it stops behaving like mana entirely. It is what emerges when integration rankers form a black star before their breakthrough. The upper-year students shifted slightly in their seats. There was a tension in their postures that spoke volumes. She paused and let the silence sit for a moment, heavy and twitching like a predator in tall grass. The hologram continued its slow pulse, drawing the eye despite the discomfort it caused. It is the opposite of pure light. Both deep dark and pure light are beyond normal mana. She turned her gaze on us, eyes lingering on the upper-year students before landing, just a little too long on me. There was a knowing quality to her look, as if she could somehow sense the duality within me, the light and dark that existed in precarious balance. But then, some of you already have both. Her words hung in the air, weighted with implication. Her eyes never left mine, and I felt a cold certainty that she knew something about me, perhaps more than she should. I tried not to smile, not because I was flattered, but because Luna was already muttering in my head, her voice a sharp counterpoint to Professor Helvane's measured tones. Oh, this is going to be fun, she said, with a voice like someone unwrapping popcorn in a theater where the movie is explosions. Her eagerness was palpable, a warm current of anticipation flowing through our shared consciousness. She wasn't wrong. Not this time. Professor Helvane moved away from the desk, circling the holographic black star like a predator assessing its prey. Deep dark manipulation is dangerous, she continued. It requires precise control and absolute focus. A momentary lapse can lead to corruption or worse, consumption. Your mana becomes the predator, and you become the prey. At the same time, it is capable of fueling so much more when used properly. She tapped the edge of the hologram, causing it to ripple like disturbed water. Most of you have only scratched the surface of what Deep Dark can do. You've learned to generate it, to hold it, perhaps even to shape it into rudimentary forms. That's like learning to light a match and thinking you understand fire. The black star in the hologram pulsed, expanding slightly before contracting again, its edges growing sharper, more defined. Advanced application requires understanding that Deep Dark isn't just dark mana taken to extremes. It's fundamentally different. It follows its own rules, has its own logic. She paused, letting that sink in. Rules that often contradict everything you've been taught about conventional mana manipulation. Chapter 293. So, first day is over, Rachel announced, resting her chin on one hand and looking for all the world like a portrait of Grace, sketched by someone trying to win an art contest and a political alliance at the same time. Her golden hair flowed over her shoulder like it had somewhere to be and didn't particularly mind being late. Yes, it is, said Cecilia, with the measured patience of someone keeping a mental tally of how many times they'd let someone else speak first. Her own golden locks shone under the room's ambient lights, but her crimson eyes sparkled like warning lights you really ought to pay attention to. Why did you call us here? Rose asked, her voice practical, direct, the tone of someone who had enough noblesse in her bloodline to skip over the flowery preamble. She sat across from Cecilia with the calmness of a woman trying not to get caught between two thunderstorms. Her auburn hair had clearly been combed with the kind of care usually reserved for diplomacy. Serafina said nothing, as usual, but the silence from her corner of the room was thick enough to spread on toast. She watched the three of them with the distant curiosity of a glacier slowly inching its way across a continent, which, in her case, was probably a perfectly accurate metaphor. Four of the most powerful young women on the planet, all in the same room. Not a tea party. Not a diplomatic summit. Just something even more dangerous. Competition. The room itself seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. The plush furnishings of Rachel's dormitory suite, all imported from regions that considered expensive to be a compliment rather than a description, shrank back against the walls as if trying to avoid being caught in the crossfire. Even the lights appeared to dim slightly, perhaps hoping not to draw attention to themselves. I believe it's been, 5 months? Rachel said, tilting her head like a swan deciding where to stab. Since we all gathered like this. So much has happened, hasn't it? Stop circling and say it, Saintess, muttered Cecilia, resting her cheek on her fist like she was trying to smother a yawn and a threat at the same time. The title Saintess hung in the air like a slightly patronizing pat on the head. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Her golden aura flared for a second, just enough to make the temperature rise like a passive-aggressive thermostat. Then she chuckled, the kind of laugh that echoed down the bloodlines of saints and troublemakers. Fine, fine, she said sweetly. I suppose you'll want to know that Arthur and I will be together for the mission evaluation. Same region. Same camp. There was a silence. Not the awkward kind. The sort of silence that lingers politely just long enough to see who throws the first fireball. You? Said three voices, in sync like an ancient prophecy finally being fulfilled. I'm going too, Rose said coolly, leaning forward just enough to suggest that she wasn't intimidated in the slightest, which meant that she almost certainly was. In case you've forgotten the assignment pairings. Yes, but unlike you, Rachel said with the sort of smile that should have come with hazard warnings. I'm uniquely equipped to support him. Healing, purifying, comforting, useful things. As opposed to what? Cecilia asked with a delicate snort that somehow managed to be both aristocratic and deeply insulting. Paradox manipulation? The ability to bend reality? I suppose those are just party tricks compared to your glowing hands. Rose accepted this unexpected defense with a gracious nod, careful not to look too grateful lest Cecilia change her mind and decide to verbally eviscerate her next. Rachel leaned back, looking satisfied with herself despite the barb. Her chair, sensing her mood, seemed to become even more comfortable in response. Then casually, too casually, she added, also, I figured it out. Cecilia and Rose blinked. Serafina arched a single eyebrow, which for her was equivalent to raising a sword and challenging someone to a duel to the death at dawn. Figured what out? Cecilia asked, voice low and suspicious, the kind of tone that made small animals burrow underground and stay there until spring. Rachel's cheeks pinked with the unmistakable hue of smug embarrassment. The color spread across her face like a victory flag being hoisted slowly and with great ceremony. He liked it. You didn't. Rose began, eyes narrowing to the point where one had to wonder if she could still see anything at all. Did you show him? Cecilia asked, and it wasn't quite a question. It was more like an accusation in designer heels. The temperature in the room dropped by at least 3 degrees, which was impressive considering the advanced climate control that was supposed to prevent exactly that kind of emotional weather. Rachel shook her head far too quickly. Not yet. Not yet. But soon. Very soon. The temperature dropped further. A blue rose bloomed in midair, humming with manna like a polite warning that happened to be attached to thorns. A crimson strand of aura slithered into the space between them, like a whisper made of chaos that was considering becoming a shout. A spear of ice manifested, hovering just above Rachel's rug. The rug, which had been imported from the southern continent at a cost that could have funded a small city's defense budget for a year, seemed to cringe in anticipation of its imminent destruction. Hey, this is my room, Rachel snapped, golden light flaring from her hand. Her light washed through the room like an annoyed sunbeam, purifying the magical tension before it could redecorate the wallpaper. Do you have any idea how hard it is to get scorch marks out of celestial silk? It was a minor clash, barely a spark, the tiniest echo of the immense power each of them wielded. Still, the walls creaked in complaint and the table whimpered quietly in the corner. A framed photo on the wall, showing Rachel in flowing white robes accepting some kind of humanitarian award, tilted slightly to the left in what could only be described as passive-aggressive interior decoration. And somewhere, just barely above a whisper, the universe itself sighed and muttered, "Here we go again." The tension was broken by the sound of a teacup being placed deliberately on its saucer. All eyes turned to Serafina, who had somehow acquired tea without anyone noticing her move. "Childish," she said, in a tone that could have flash-frozen a volcano. "Well, even then you're still dreaming like always," said Cecilia, pivoting away from Serafina's judgment with the smugness of a woman who'd just found the last slice of cake and was making sure everyone saw her eat it. "I made out with him. For an hour." Rachel's expression dropped faster than a government budget promise. Her violet eyes gleamed, not with tears but with something far more dangerous. Competitive spite. The temperature dipped with it, as if the very air had decided to side with her mood. "I did too, Cecilia. You're not special." Rose chimed in, her voice casual, but there was a frost to it. The temperature dropped another degree. Somewhere in the room, a decorative plant gave up and wilted. "Bickering idiots," Serafina said, without even looking up from the cup of tea she wasn't drinking. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words had the weight of ancient glaciers. "I slept in the same bed as him." Rachel's head snapped up so quickly it might have caused whiplash. The air in the room seemed to crystallize, hanging suspended for a moment as if the laws of physics themselves were waiting for elaboration. Before she could ask, Serafina added with an edge sharp enough to etch glass. "With consent." "I had consent," Rachel protested, clearly offended at the implication she hadn't. But her defense was met not with words, but with a collective, perfectly synchronized expression of doubt from the other three. It was the kind of synchronized facial expression that competitive teams trained years to achieve. Dismissive looks, 3. Dignity, 0. "Anyway," Rachel sniffed, twirling a strand of golden hair like it owed her money. "As long as I have him, he'll give in to me first." The other girls turned toward her slowly, not to her face. Oh no. Their eyes were locked with the intense focus of satellites on a heat signature, on one particular gravitationally significant part of her. Even Serafina tilted her head, her usually placid expression twitching ever so slightly. The movement was almost imperceptible, like watching continental drift in real time, but for Serafina it was practically a double take. Rose muttered something under her breath, the kind of thing you didn't say unless you were already halfway to a guilt spiral. "Even if it's Arthur," she murmured, trailing off like a sentence that decided it didn't want to start a war. Rachel didn't need to ask what she meant. She already knew, and her smile was pure, radiant victory. The kind of smile that said, "Checkmate. And also, you're welcome to forfeit any time." "Ladies," Rachel said, rising from her seat with the graceful inevitability of someone who knew exactly when to make an exit. "This has been delightful truly, but I have preparations to make for our mission. A week with Arthur in a war zone." She let the thought linger in the air like an expensive perfume. "I intend to make the most of it." As she gestured toward the door, a subtle hint that the meeting was concluded, Cecilia stood as well, smoothing her uniform with the precise movements of a predator grooming itself before a hunt. "Don't get too comfortable with your advantage," she warned, her crimson eyes glinting. "War zones have a way of changing plans. And people." Rose and Serafina rose as well, forming an unintentional tableau of power and beauty that would have made even the most jaded artist reach for a capture device. "Until the Western Front, then," Rose said, her tone deceptively light. "May the best woman win," Rachel replied with a smile that could have illuminated a small city. "I intend to," said all four women simultaneously, then glared at each other with the kind of synchronized hostility that suggested they'd been practicing. Chapter 294, Third Mission. Finally, it was time for the third mission. There was something different in the air this time. Not just the ozone-rich tang of the warp gates or the distant hum of orbital drones, but the unmistakable weight of expectation. Tension floated through the academy halls like a very polite ghost that no one wanted to acknowledge, but everyone was painfully aware of. Unlike the previous missions where students picked their own poison, this time the poison picked us. We were being sent directly to the frontier zones. This was the real thing. Well, as real as anything could be in a world where most conflicts were settled through carefully orchestrated shows of force rather than actual bloodshed. The age of total war was behind humanity, thankfully, but that didn't mean the borders between controlled territory and miasmic zones were anything resembling safe. And that was enough to make even the more arrogant students double-check their insurance nanobots. There were 3 continents hosting what instructors politely called active engagement areas: Northern, Southern, and Western. 102nd-year students were carefully divided into 3 main batches, then diced into smaller groups with the efficiency of a bureaucratic chef with a fondness for even numbers. Lucky me, I ended up stationed with Clana, Rose, and Rachel on the western frontier, otherwise known as the land of orcs, ogres, and people who thought tactical fashion meant dirt-resistant cloaks with unnecessarily dramatic collars. The Academy's departure hall buzzed with the usual pre-mission activities. Last-minute equipment checks, hurried goodbyes, and the occasional panic attack disguised as enthusiastic stretching. Most students wore their standard-issue field uniforms. Sleek, practical ensembles designed to look both intimidating and photogenic should any news drones happen to be in the area. "Are you excited?" Rachel asked, tilting her head in that dangerously disarming way of hers. Her smile was wide and full of sunshine, which would have been entirely appropriate if we weren't metaphorically standing under the gathering clouds of potential responsibility and actual physical exertion. Rachel had a very particular gift. Not one officially recorded in any spellbook or magical compendium, but potent nonetheless. She radiated joy like a miniature sun. Being near her was like having your soul baked at 180 degrees Celsius until it was golden brown and emotionally vulnerable. "Yeah," I said with a smile. "I'm excited." "Because I'm with you?" she asked, her smile turning the dial from sunny to blinding. She adjusted the strap of her field pack with the sort of casual grace that suggested she'd practiced the movement in front of a mirror until it looked effortlessly elegant. "And Rose?" I added helpfully, gesturing to where Rose was methodically organizing her equipment with the precision of someone who color-coded their sock drawer. Rachel blinked, then beamed, then threw herself into a hug so enthusiastic it could have knocked over a less fortified man. I managed to stay upright, barely. I missed you too," she said, completely ignoring the dozen or so curious or scandalized eyes from nearby students. A group of first-years watched with expressions ranging from awe to second-hand embarrassment. Then came Rose, moving with the deliberate grace of a noblewoman trained to make her disapproval felt through body language alone. She placed a perfectly manicured hand on Rachel's shoulder. A diplomatic tap. A warning shot. Rachel, of course, ignored her like a cat ignoring a water sprayer. The hand stayed. Rachel stayed. The air chilled by half a degree. A nearby temperature gauge actually registered the change, beeping softly in confusion. Finally, with a theatrical click of her tongue that could probably be weaponized if tuned correctly, Rachel disengaged and floated 2 centimeters away. "Hey, Arthur," Rose said sweetly, her smile entirely innocent in the way that very much wasn't. I gave her a nod with a smile on my face, silently appreciating her ability to look combat-ready and runway-ready simultaneously. "Wow, those 2 are already fighting," Clana said, drifting over to my side like a sleep-deprived wraith in a hoodie. Her uniform was technically correct but rumpled in a way that suggested she'd possibly slept in it. Or on it. Or near it. She yawned with all the drama of a Victorian ghost realizing it had to haunt again, and patted my shoulder with the casual sympathy of someone watching two kittens sharpen their claws as they glared at each other. "You're going to need hazard pay?" Clanna muttered, stretching her arms like the act of being awake was a chore someone else had dumped on her to-do list. The frontier might actually be safer than this. Around us, other student groups formed, clustered according to their assigned destinations. Jean and his team were preparing for the northern region, their equipment designed for colder climates. I spotted Lucifer with his southern team, looking as perfectly composed as ever, like he'd just stepped out of a recruitment poster rather than preparing for a potentially hazardous assignment. Rin caught my eye from across the hall and gave me a slight nod, the kind of acknowledgement that contained neither friendship nor hostility, just professional recognition. I returned it with similar neutrality. Before I could respond to Clanna, perhaps with something inspiring, or at least resigned, Nero's voice sliced through the charged air like a laser through butter. "All second-year students are present, so let's begin," Nero said, his voice amplified by some invisible sound system that made every word sound like a commandment from on high. He stood on a raised platform at the front of the hall, managing to look both completely still and somehow radiating impatience. "As previously stated, you've been assigned to different sections of the frontier zones. Upon arrival, you'll be under the guidance of military officers designated to your region. I don't care if you're a prince or a princess, none of it matters." He paused. The silence that followed was the kind that suggested something important was about to be said, possibly followed by something very, very bureaucratic. "You will listen, you will observe, and you will adapt. These are not simulations. The frontier zones are controlled, but they are not safe. You are here to learn how to lead, yes, but also how to assess risk and make appropriate decisions." Well, that was moderately comforting. At least he hadn't explicitly mentioned death this time. Remember, these frontier posts maintain the balance between our territories and the wilder regions. Most of what you'll encounter are surveillance operations, containment protocols, and occasional small-scale engagements. Your job is to learn, not to be heroes. This last bit seemed directed specifically at several known troublemakers in our class, possibly including me, if the brief eye contact was any indication. The warp gate activated in a flash of violet-blue light that danced with static. The very fabric of space-time did a little shimmy. "Western Continent teams, you're first," Nero announced. I felt a slight nudge against my arm and turned to find Clanna offering me half of her nutrient bar. The gesture was so unexpected I almost didn't react. "Take it," she said with the seriousness of someone offering their last will and testament. I accepted the offering with appropriate solemnity. "Thanks. I packed snacks," Rachel interjected, patting a suspiciously large pocket on her field pack. "Homemade energy cookies with enhanced nutritional profiles." "I brought actual food," Rose countered smoothly. "Vacuum-sealed gourmet meals prepared by the Vackert Estate's head chef." The two women stared at each other with the intense focus of rival predators who'd spotted the same prey. Clanna sighed deeply, the sound of someone who'd seen this particular movie too many times and was tired of the predictable plot. "This is going to be a long 2 weeks. One by one, we began stepping into the gate, our boots echoing softly as we crossed the threshold between Academy luxury and whatever frontier post awaited us on the other side. Clanna yawned again, just before stepping through. "Hope there's a bed on the other side," she muttered. "Or at least a post with reasonable nap breaks." And with that, she vanished in a shimmer of light. Rachel went next, her golden hair catching the warp glow like it had been engineered to do so. She didn't look back, but she did adjust her posture just enough to ensure her silhouette was at its most photogenic as she disappeared. Rose followed, more composed, a silent vow in her eyes, a promise to do more than just participate, a promise to excel. Then it was my turn. I took a breath, mentally reviewing my own preparations and plans. The Western frontier wasn't just an assignment, it was an opportunity. One that fit perfectly into what I needed to accomplish. "Mr. Nightingale," Nero said just as I approached the gate. "Try not to cause an international incident this time." I smiled politely. "No promises, Professor." And with that, I stepped through the gate, leaving behind the safety of the academy and toward whatever awaited on the frontier. Not war exactly, but definitely not peace either. Something in between, the careful balance that humanity had maintained for generations. A balance I intended to tip when the time was right. Chapter 295. What did people expect when they heard the words front lines? Some battered trench full of mud, blood, and the smell of old regrets? Ration tents and broken radios, the standard post-apocalyptic picnic? Maybe the occasional grizzled veteran growling about the old days while lighting a cigar with a flamethrower? Well, yes. But also no. The truth was stranger. The frontier outpost looked like someone had asked a paranoid architect to build a fortress, and then told him to do it again but bigger and with extra budget. Towering walls stretched out like the skeletons of long-dead titans, bristling with sensor arrays, defense systems, and enough shielding to survive a minor geological event or an aggressive family dinner. Behind those walls weren't tents. There were modular complexes, reinforced buildings designed to be picked up, dropped into a monitoring zone, and then promptly maintain operations under almost any conditions. They housed everything. Living quarters, canteens, clinics, strategy halls, even coffee shops with unnecessarily poetic drink names. It wasn't quite a military compound in the traditional sense. More like a highly secure research station with combat capabilities. As I stepped through the warp gate, the world shimmered for half a second before solidifying into the unmistakable atmosphere of the frontier. You could feel it in the air, heavy, charged, and watching you like someone evaluating a potentially interesting but unpredictable new colleague. Waiting there, standing with the posture of someone who never stopped standing straight, was a woman. Her hair flowed in soft shades of frostbitten blue, like winter wind turned into silk. Golden eyes, sharp and crackling with mana, swept over us like searchlights judging a performance they didn't expect much from. And oh, she was powerful. Not the loud kind. No explosions, no auras that screamed. Her strength was quiet, like a loaded gun, safety off, pointed somewhere just out of sight. Maylin Potton, peak immortal rank necromancer. The kind of name that made other names feel underdressed. Also, a 6-star Grand Marshal. Meaning she'd earned more military distinctions than most people had bones. She raised one hand. Attention! Her voice cracked across the air like a whip wrapped in authority. The 3 girls at my side, Rachel, Rose, and Clanna, straightened faster than guilt in a church. I casually adjusted my posture as well, trying not to look like the slouching schoolboy who just realized the headmistress was behind him. "Welcome, Academy students," she said, her tone sharp, her vowels precise enough to draw blood. "I am Grand Marshal Maylin. You are now under my jurisdiction for the duration of this mission." Her eyes glided over us, weighing, measuring, perhaps contemplating our potential just in case. I will say this only once. Do not treat this like a vacation. This is not an internship. You will not be pampered. You will not be sheltered. And you certainly will not be special. Not to me. She stepped forward once, heels clicking like punctuation marks. To me, you are trainees. You are assets. Your rank, your bloodline, your royal titles, none of it matters beyond what you can contribute to operations. The only thing that separates you from the rest of the personnel is whether or not you perform. And trust me, I expect performance. Maylin Potton tapped her tablet with the clinical precision of someone who'd probably used it to order both coffee and tactical assessments in the same breath. She scrolled, skimmed, and looked up at us like we were particularly interesting entries in a spreadsheet labeled Academy Visitors with Potential. "I got your files from Mythos," she said. "Every duel, every test, every time you blinked too hard and destabilized a training room. I must admit, you're all quite exceptional. Annoyingly so." Her golden eyes flicked to me. Arthur Nightingale, one step below integration rank, gifted, and a suspicious tendency to survive things you shouldn't. "Your captain." Then she pointed vaguely at the others with the tablet like it was a holy relic. "Rachel, Rose, Clanna lieutenants. Under his command." Rachel looked proud, shoulders straightening further, a subtle smile touching her lips. Rose raised a brow, the slight tilt of her head suggesting she was already calculating the implications. Clanna yawned, though she did manage to look slightly more alert than usual. "It's a small unit," Maylin continued, "but you'll be merged with other teams for operations. That said, don't expect to coast on the others' work. I'll know if you do. I always know." The shadows seemed to lean in a little at that. "And now you're dismissed for the day. Rest. Hydrate. Don't do anything that would require paperwork." She glanced at a soldier nearby. "Private Rogies. Guide them to their accommodations." The private saluted with the efficiency of a man who had recently remembered his superior outranked him by several universes and set off marching. We followed, carrying our gear with a blend of respectful attention and subtle confusion. As we walked through the complex, Private Rogies, a lean man with close-cropped hair and the watchful eyes of someone who had seen enough to be cautious but not enough to be jaded, pointed out various facilities. Mess hall is that way, he said, gesturing to a large building with actual windows. Food's decent. Chef used to work at a 5-star restaurant in the central continent before deciding cooking for soldiers was more honest work. Is there a training area? Rose asked, her voice perfectly modulated to sound merely curious rather than eager. Two, actually, Rogies replied. Standard Physical Training Center is in the East Wing. The mana practice facility is underground, safer that way. Klana perked up momentarily. And the recreational areas? Rogies almost smiled. We have a common room with entertainment systems, a small library, and what passes for a garden on the roof of the administrative building. Not exactly luxury, but better than what most outposts have. How often do you see combat? I asked, watching his reaction carefully. His expression shifted slightly, becoming more measured. Less than you might think. We monitor the border more than we engage. Most days are routine patrols and sensor maintenance. The occasional skirmish happens, but large-scale confrontations are rare. Rachel stepped closer to me as we walked, her shoulder occasionally brushing against mine. What about medical facilities? She asked, her interest genuine. I've trained extensively in healing arts. Full clinic with modern equipment, Rogies answered, seeming to appreciate her professional interest. Dr. Voss runs it. She's ascendant rank with a specialization in healing. You'll likely meet her during your orientation tomorrow. We turned down a corridor with polished floors and reinforced walls. The lighting was practical but not harsh, creating an atmosphere of efficiency rather than austerity. The marshal mentioned we'd be working with other teams, I said. Are there other academy students here? Rogies nodded. 3 other groups arrived yesterday. They've been assigned to different sections based on their abilities. You'll be briefed on the full structure tomorrow. Rose moved forward to walk beside me, creating a subtle triangle with Rachel. And what's our first assignment likely to be? She asked, her tone suggesting she was already planning 3 steps ahead. Observation, most likely, Rogies said. The marshal usually starts newcomers with reconnaissance patrols. Gets you familiar with the terrain and protocols without immediately throwing you into anything complex. He stopped before a row of doors, each marked with a simple numeric designation. Your quarters. 204 through 207. Captain gets the end unit slightly larger. Standard amenities inside. Comm panel by the door connects to central command if needed. Klana was already eyeing her door like it contained the promise of a comfortable pillow. When's the morning briefing? She asked, stifling another yawn. 0800 hours, Rogies replied. Mess hall opens at 0600 if you want breakfast first. He handed each of us a small metallic card. Access passes. Don't lose them. They're keyed to your mana signature. With a final nod that seemed to encompass both respect and mild pity for what we might face in the coming days, Rogies departed, leaving us in the hallway. The housing was surprising. The frontier outpost didn't skimp. We were each given private quarters with reinforced doors, insulation, and a complimentary fruit bowl that suggested someone cared about preventing scurvy. The beds looked like they'd actually let you sleep, which was pleasantly unexpected for a place that was constantly alert for unusual activities at the border. I stepped inside my room, which was all clean lines and subtle functionality. Modern comfort with a side of practical readiness. My coat landed on the back of a chair. My boots found the corner. I leaned back onto the bed, half expecting it to be rock hard, but no, just comfortable enough to be decent. Before I could properly settle, a familiar voice spoke from the doorway. So, Captain, huh? Rose stood there, leaning against the doorframe with an expression that mixed amusement and something harder to define. Apparently, I replied, sitting up. Well deserved, she said, stepping inside and glancing around the room. Though I noticed they gave you the bigger quarters. Rank has its privileges. Want to trade? I offered, knowing she wouldn't accept. She pursed her lips. There was a pause. Then flash. A light brighter than thought, as if the universe blinked. My jaw dropped. Chapter 296. A light brighter than thought, as if the universe blinked. My jaw dropped. What are you doing, Rachel? I asked as I looked at her, her dress gone for a nightgown. And not just any nightgown, one that seemed designed specifically to make men forget how to breathe properly. It was a whisper of silk in a shade of pale gold that complemented her hair and left very little to the imagination. Wow, you may be the first guy getting jumped by a saintess, Luna said in my mind. but I could feel her telepathic voice trembling with something between amusement and disbelief. There was a note of impressed surprise there too, as if even she hadn't expected Rachel to be this bold. "You are so mean," Rachel said as she came forward and settled on top of my lap with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed this moment dozens of times in her head. She put her hands on my chest, pushing me down as I put my hands on the bed to steady myself. Her weight was light, but her presence felt enormous in the small room. "You made out with Rose and Cecilia but not me." Her voice carried an accusation wrapped in vulnerability, her sapphire eyes watching my reaction carefully. "Yeah, I did," I replied, holding back excuses or explanations that would only complicate things. Instead, I went with honesty. "So what? You jealous?" Rachel's sapphire eyes widened at my directness, a mixture of surprise and anticipation flooding her expression as I reached up and caressed her cheek. The simple touch seemed to unravel something in her. Her face flushed a delicate pink as she leaned into my touch like a cat seeking affection. Then, she put her hand on top of mine and began caressing it, her fingers tracing small patterns against my skin. "I'm jealous enough to imprison you," Rachel said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow contained both playfulness and a hint of something deeper, more possessive. Her eyes had that particular gleam that suggested she wasn't entirely joking. "She got that crazy eyes," Luna commented, her mental voice carrying a note of warning. "The kind that says she might actually build a dungeon and keep you there if given half a chance." I ignored Luna's commentary, focusing instead on the girl in front of me. "The frontier outpost, our mission, Marshal Malin's orders." All of it faded to background noise. "Shoo!" I said as I pulled her in, one hand sliding to the back of her neck. Her golden hair was soft between my fingers, like holding sunlight. Then I kissed her lips. Her lips were soft, warm, and tasted faintly sweet, like she'd eaten something with honey not long before coming here. Her kissing technique was sloppy compared to Cecilia's practiced precision, enthusiastic but unrefined, all passion and very little technique. She pressed too hard, moved too eagerly, clearly inexperienced but making up for it with sheer determination. It was cute, seeing her seek out my lips desperately with her sloppy technique. The way she tilted her head at slightly the wrong angle, how she seemed uncertain what to do with her hands. I held back a smile as I held her head and kissed her deeply, guiding her gently, showing her without words how to slow down, how to match my rhythm. She learned quickly, her movements becoming more synchronized with mine. Her hands finally settled on my shoulders, gripping firmly as she leaned into the kiss. A small sound escaped her throat, something between a sigh and a moan that suggested she'd been wanting this for far longer than she'd admit. "You are so good," Rachel panted as we separated, her breathing uneven, her eyes half-lidded with a mixture of wonder and desire. A strand of golden hair had fallen across her face, and I brushed it back gently. "Well, you are just bad," I said as I put my finger on her lips, her cheeks reddening more at the teasing comment. "But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means you need practice." Her eyes lit up at that, understanding the implication. The flush on her face spread down her neck, disappearing beneath the thin fabric of her nightgown. "So, you wanted to make out?" I asked with a tilt of my head as she nodded, a mixture of shyness and determination in her expression. "Yes," she whispered, then with more confidence. "Yes, I did. I'm tired of watching from the sidelines while Rose and Cecilia, and even Serafina get ahead." "Get ahead?" I raised an eyebrow. "This isn't a race, Rachel." "Isn't it, though?" she countered, her fingers tracing a pattern on my chest. "We all want the same thing. You." There was something disarmingly honest about her statement, stripped of the usual games and pretenses that often characterized interactions between people dancing around attraction. "She's got a point," Luna chimed in. "You've collected quite the harem, Arthur." I chose to ignore that comment too. Then we kissed again. This time, Rachel was more attentive, following my lead, mirroring my movements. Her hands moved from my shoulders to my hair, fingers threading through it with gentle curiosity. I let my own hands rest at her waist, feeling the warmth of her skin through the thin silk. When we separated again, her eyes were different, still filled with desire, but now mixed with a kind of determined focus, as if she'd added "become better at kissing" to her personal achievement list. Rachel leaned in and kissed me again, more confidently this time. Her learning curve was impressive. Already she was finding the right pressure, the right rhythm. My hands moved up her back, feeling the delicate structure of her shoulder blades beneath silk and skin. "This is getting interesting," Luna commented, her mental voice now tinged with something that felt uncomfortably close to voyeuristic enjoyment. "Though if she's staying much longer, you might want to engage the privacy protocols on the door. Unless you want private rogues walking in with a status update." That was actually a valid point. I reached out with one hand toward the door panel, activating the room's privacy settings without breaking the kiss. The lock engaged with a soft click that Rachel didn't seem to notice, too absorbed in our current activity. When we finally separated again, both slightly breathless, I found myself studying her face, the delicate curve of her cheekbones, the earnest blue of her eyes, the way her golden hair seemed to catch even the most minimal light in the room. There was something genuinely captivating about Rachel, beyond her obvious beauty, a kind of radiance that came from within. "What are you thinking?" she asked, her head tilted slightly, curiosity in her gaze. "That you're full of surprises," I answered honestly. Her smile in response was bright enough to rival the Frontier Outpost security lights. "Good," she said, settling more comfortably on my lap. "I wouldn't want to be predictable." And with that, she leaned in again, apparently intent on making up for lost time. Time seemed to blur as we continued. Minutes, perhaps longer, passed in a haze of gentle exploration and increasingly confident kisses. Rachel was a quick study, adapting to my pace, finding a rhythm that worked for both of us. Her initial clumsiness gave way to something more intentional, though still tinged with an endearing eagerness that was uniquely hers. When we finally pulled apart, her lips were slightly swollen, her hair disheveled from my fingers running through it. The composed saintess image she typically projected had given way to something more human, more vulnerable. "You learn fast," I said, tucking a strand of golden hair behind her ear. She smiled, pleased by the compliment. "I excel at everything I commit to." "Is that so?" I couldn't help but smile back. There was something refreshing about her straightforward confidence. Rachel nodded, shifting slightly on my lap. "Ask anyone. Once I decide to master something, I don't stop until I've succeeded." Her eyes held mine with surprising intensity. "And I've decided to master you, Arthur Nightingale." "Bold declaration," Luna commented dryly in my mind, though I think she might be underestimating the complexity of the subject matter. I raised an eyebrow. "Master me? That's an interesting choice of words." "Is it?" Rachel tilted her head, the gesture reminiscent of a curious bird. "I don't think so. I want to understand everything about you. What makes you smile, what makes you angry, what drives you." Her finger traced a line along my jaw. "So," I said, "now that you've gotten what you came for, are you satisfied?" Her laughter was soft but genuine. "For tonight, perhaps." She leaned forward, resting her forehead against mine briefly. "But satisfied implies an ending. I prefer to think of this as a beginning." The weight of her on my lap, the scent of her perfume, something floral with hints of vanilla, and the warmth of her skin beneath my hands created a peculiar kind of comfort. Not just physical attraction, but something more complicated. A connection I hadn't anticipated. "We should probably get some rest," I said eventually, practical concerns reasserting themselves. "Early briefing tomorrow." Rachel sighed dramatically. Always responsible, even now. But she nodded and slowly disentangled herself from me, standing up with surprising grace. The nightgown caught the room's dim light, briefly outlining her silhouette before settling around her. "Thank you," she said, smoothing down her hair, attempting to restore some semblance of order to her appearance. "For what?" "For not comparing me to them," she said simply. "For letting me be just Rachel." I understood immediately. Rose, Cecilia, Serafina. Each carried their own formidable presence, their own distinct appeal. It would have been easy to draw comparisons, to measure one against the others. I hadn't realized she would notice the absence of such comparison. "You don't need to be compared to anyone," I told her. "You stand perfectly well on your own." Her smile at that moment was different from any I'd seen from her before. Quieter, more genuine, touched with something that might have been gratitude or relief. "I'll see you at breakfast?" she asked, moving toward the door. I nodded. "I'll save you a seat." Rachel paused at the doorway, her hand on the panel. She looked back at me over her shoulder, a hint of mischief returning to her expression. "Don't think this means I'm going to go easy on you during the mission, Captain." "I wouldn't dream of it, Lieutenant," I replied with mock seriousness. She activated the door, checking the hallway quickly to ensure it was empty. Finding no witnesses, she stepped through, but not before throwing me one last glance. Part promise, part challenge. As the door slid shut behind her, I collapsed back onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. Chapter 297. The next morning I woke precisely at 0600, my body automatically adhering to the strict military schedule despite having only spent one night at the outpost. A quick glance at the reinforced window confirmed the day had already begun outside, the harsh frontier sunlight casting long shadows across the compound. First order of business. Mess hall for breakfast. After a brisk shower that alternated between scalding and frigid with military efficiency, I changed into my Mythos Academy uniform. The frontier outpost's mess hall was surprisingly impressive. A large, open space with high ceilings and actual windows that allowed the morning light to filter through reinforced glass. Unlike the stereotypical military canteen with its drab colors and utilitarian design, this place had clearly been built with morale in mind. The walls were painted in warm neutral tones, the lighting was bright without being harsh, and the tables, arranged in neat rows, were made of solid materials that didn't immediately bring to mind institutional dining. Clanna was, predictably, asleep, despite being fully dressed in her uniform, which somehow managed to look simultaneously pristine and rumpled, a paradox only Clanna could achieve. She had folded her arms into a makeshift pillow, and was currently demonstrating her remarkable ability to sleep through breakfast in a room full of people. Her soft, rhythmic breathing suggested this wasn't a light doze, but a committed slumber. A small puddle of drool had formed beneath her cheek, threatening the integrity of her sleeve. Rachel noticed me first, her face lighting up with a smile that carried just a hint of the previous night's intimacy. She waved, the movement energetic enough to draw attention from nearby tables. Her golden hair caught the morning light, creating a halo effect that reinforced her saintess image with almost theatrical precision. "Arthur, we saved you a seat," she called out, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. The enthusiasm in her voice caused several nearby soldiers to glance over with barely concealed curiosity. As I approached, I noticed Rose was also present, sitting across from Rachel. Unlike Clanna's abandonment of consciousness and Rachel's radiant energy, Rose maintained her usual composed elegance. Her posture was perfect, her uniform immaculate, as if she'd been awake for hours preparing for a formal inspection rather than a routine briefing. "Good morning," I said, sliding into the seat. "How are you guys feeling this morning?" I carefully avoided making any special eye contact with Rachel, aware that Rose was watching our interaction with the observational skills of a particularly attentive hawk. "They dragged me here," came a muffled voice from the table's surface. Clanna raised her head just enough to fix me with one bleary eye, the violet iris clouded with the fog of interrupted sleep. "Physically, from my bed, before the Sunday." Each word dropped from her mouth with the weight of a personal tragedy. "It's 0700 Clanna," Rose pointed out, her tone crisp and precise. "The sun has been up for hours. In fact, it rose approximately 3 hours and 22 minutes ago. Leave it to Rose to know the exact sunrise time without checking." "Not in my room it hasn't," Clanna muttered, before letting her head drop back onto her arms with the dramatic finality of someone planning to hibernate through winter. I blocked the windows with spare blankets. Perfect darkness was perfect sleep, until these monsters intervened. Rachel leaned toward me, her shoulder brushing mine in a way that seemed both casual and deliberately intimate. The faint scent of her perfume, something floral with hints of vanilla, momentarily distracted me from Clanna's sleep-deprived complaints. "We had to practically carry her. She sleeps like the dead, but heavier. I think at one point she was actively trying to increase her mass to make it harder for us to move her." "A tactical application of my gift," came Clanna's muffled response, surprising me that she was even listening. "You should eat," Rose said, pushing a tray toward me. It contained a surprisingly appetizing breakfast, scrambled eggs that actually looked fluffy rather than rubbery, some kind of golden grain with flecks of herbs, fresh fruit arranged with military precision, and bread that actually looked homemade rather than manufactured in a laboratory. "The protein content is adequate and you'll need the energy." The marshal seems like someone who expects peak performance. As I began eating, I became aware of the attention our table was receiving. Around us, the mess hall was filled with military personnel in various uniforms denoting their specialties and ranks. The dark blue of communications officers, the muted green of regular infantry, the slate gray of tactical specialists, all moving with the efficiency of people who had been through this routine countless times, collecting their food, finding seats, eating with purpose rather than pleasure. But many of them were watching us. Not staring outright, they were too disciplined for that, but observing from the corners of their eyes, through quick glances between bites, in the way conversations seemed to dip slightly whenever one of us moved or spoke. A table of what appeared to be junior officers kept finding reasons to refill their coffee cups at the station closest to us. "We're quite the attraction," Rose noted quietly, having noticed the same thing. Her fingers drummed a precise rhythm on the table, a habit she displayed when analyzing a situation. Like exotic animals in a menagerie. Of course, what else did we expect? Rachel sighed, though the slight lift of her chin suggested she wasn't entirely displeased with the attention. "We're from Mythos Academy. To them, we might as well be from another dimension." She had a point. Mythos Academy students were rare enough, only a few hundred in the entire world, and those from Class 2A even rarer. Add to that the presence of multiple gifted individuals, royal blood, and power levels that pushed the boundaries of what was normal for our age, and we became something between celebrities and curiosities. Living legends in training, wrapped in teenage bodies and academy uniforms. A group of younger soldiers at a nearby table weren't even trying to hide their interest. One of them, a freckled man with a freshly shaved head who couldn't have been much older than us, kept darting glances at Rachel. His expression a mixture of awe and something close to reverence. His tray remained untouched, his attention entirely captured by the golden-haired saintess 3 tables away. "I think you have an admirer," I told her quietly, nodding subtly in his direction. Rachel followed my gaze and smiled, giving the young soldier a small wave that nearly caused him to choke on his coffee. His comrades erupted into barely suppressed laughter, elbowing him mercilessly as his face turned a shade of red that would have made a sunset jealous. The poor man looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. "The saintess effect," Clana commented dryly, having raised her head just enough to witness the exchange. "Very useful in diplomatic situations. Less so in combat, unless embarrassing the enemy to death becomes a viable tactic." With that profound observation delivered, she lowered her head again, apparently having exhausted her daily quota of wakefulness. "It's not just Rachel," Rose observed, her eyes scanning the room with calculated precision. "They're watching all of us. We represent something different, power outside their normal hierarchy, potential they can recognize but not fully comprehend." She adjusted the cuff of her sleeve with deliberate care. "We are, essentially, variables they cannot easily categorize." She was right. The soldiers around us were trained, disciplined, and many likely skilled in combat. Veterans of the frontier, faces weathered by harsh conditions and constant vigilance. But none of them had what we had: gifts, prestigious academy training, and the potential to reach ranks that many could only dream of. "They're trying to figure out if we're worth the hype," I said, understanding the dynamic. "If academy students are actually as special as they've heard, or just privileged kids playing at being soldiers." I took another bite of the surprisingly good eggs. Can't blame them, really. I'd be curious too. I finished my breakfast, which was indeed better than expected, and nudged Clana with my elbow. "Briefing in 20 minutes. You might want to actually eat something. I doubt Marshal Maylin will accept." I was hungry, as an excuse for poor performance. She groaned but lifted her head and mechanically began to consume the food in front of her, eyes still half closed as if she were sleepwalking through the process. "So," Rachel said, her voice deliberately casual as she traced patterns in the condensation on her water glass, "how did everyone sleep?" The question carried a subtle weight, the lightness of her tone not quite matching the careful calculation in her eyes. The question seemed innocent enough, but I caught the subtle glance she threw my way, and the equally subtle narrowing of Rose's eyes in response. The temperature at the table seemed to drop by a few degrees, despite the mess hall's efficient climate control. "Like a baby," Rose answered, her voice smooth as polished marble. "Though I did take a little evening stroll around the compound. The security protocols here are fascinating, layers upon layers of defenses, both physical and magical. Someone invested considerable resources into making this place virtually impenetrable." She took a deliberate sip of her tea. "I'm sure you found your own way to pass the evening, Rachel." "I want to sleep more," Clana yawned, apparently oblivious to the subtle tension. She stretched her arms above her head, nearly knocking over her water glass in the process. "But you guys unfairly dragged me out for no reason. The briefing isn't for another 20 minutes, which is at least 15 minutes of potential sleep you've stolen from me." She narrowed her violet eyes while looking at me. I'm keeping track, you know? There will be retribution. Possibly in the form of me falling asleep during your most important speech someday. You were going to be late, Clanna, I said, trying not to smile at her dramatic outrage. And somehow I doubt Marshall Maylin is the type to appreciate tardiness, no matter how creatively you justify it. A chime sounded throughout the mess hall. The tone was pleasant but insistent, immediately triggering a response from every soldier present. The soldiers around us immediately began clearing their tables with practiced efficiency, movements synchronized as if choreographed. That's our cue, I said, standing up. Briefing time. I felt a subtle shift in my demeanor, the casual breakfast conversation giving way to the focus required for whatever mission awaited us. This wasn't a classroom exercise or a simulated scenario. This was real frontier duty, with real consequences. Chapter 298. Where's the briefing again? Rachel asked as we stepped into the corridor, the stark lighting here a contrast to the warmer atmosphere of the mess hall. The passageway bustled with morning activity, personnel moving with purpose rather than haste. Command Center, East Wing, Rose replied promptly, as if she'd memorized the entire compound layout overnight. Knowing Rose, she probably had. We passed it during our tour yesterday. Third intersection, right turn, past the auxiliary communications hub, second set of security doors on the left. We made our way through the compound, our academy uniforms standing out against the functional military attire of those we passed. The contrast emphasized our outsider status. We were guests here, temporary additions to a well-established ecosystem. The frontier outpost was fully awake now, personnel moving with purpose through corridors, carrying equipment, checking systems, maintaining the constant vigilance that kept the border secure. The hum of machinery and the occasional muffled announcement created a constant backdrop of sound, the heartbeat of the outpost's operations. The command center was housed in one of the more heavily reinforced sections of the complex, nestled deep within layers of security measures. The architecture here was noticeably different, less concern for aesthetics, more emphasis on function and protection. The walls were thicker, the doors heavier, the surveillance more obvious. Security here was visibly tighter. More guards, more scanners, more restricted access points. Our passes were checked twice before we were allowed to proceed to the briefing room. First by an automated system and then by a stern-faced woman whose eyes lingered on each of us as if committing our faces to memory. Mythos Academy students, Class 2A, she said. Not quite a question but not quite a statement either. Marshall Maylin is expecting you. There was something in her tone, not quite awe, but a certain weight to her words that suggested she'd heard stories about us, or perhaps about the academy in general. Grand Marshal Maylin was already there when we entered, studying a three-dimensional holographic map that hovered above the central table. Various points on the display glowed with different colors, representing data I couldn't immediately interpret. She didn't look up immediately, focused on whatever tactical information the display was providing. Her posture was perfect, her blue hair falling in a precise curtain that framed her face. Even standing still, she radiated an aura of command that filled the room. The room itself was impressive, cutting-edge technology seamlessly integrated with practical design. Screens lined the walls, some showing terrain data, others monitoring various sectors of the frontier. Tactical displays updated in real time, showing patrol movements, sensor readings, and what appeared to be mana concentration levels across different regions. A few other officers were present, standing at attention near the walls, their expressions carefully neutral. I recognized Private Rogies among them, though his posture was considerably stiffer in the marshal's presence. He gave us the briefest of nods as we entered, a nearly imperceptible acknowledgement that somehow managed to convey both greeting and warning simultaneously. So, Maylin said finally, looking up from the map to regard us with those penetrating golden eyes that seemed to see more than just physical appearance. The Academy's finest, ready for their first real assignment. Her gaze swept over us, assessing, calculating, lingering briefly on each face before moving on. Her gaze lingered on Clanna, who was making a valiant effort to look fully awake, the slight tremor in her eyelids the only betrayal of her internal struggle against sleep. More or less. Let's begin, shall we? She said. Marshal Maylin tapped the holographic display, causing the map to zoom in on a specific region. The terrain was mostly forested, with rolling hills and a narrow river cutting through it. A glowing line marked what I assumed was the border between human territory and the lands beyond. Your mission is straightforward, she said, her tone clipped and efficient. Reconnaissance of Sector 17. Her finger traced a path that extended approximately 5 kilometers beyond the border. We've detected unusual movement patterns in this area over the past week. Nothing alarming, but something has changed. The hologram shifted, showing heat signature data and movement patterns represented by colored dots. The patterns were subtle, nothing that screamed immediate danger, but definitely a deviation from what I assumed was normal. Typically, the ogre clans in this region maintain consistent patrol routes. They're creatures of habit, Mei Lin continued. But these patrols have shifted. They're avoiding this area entirely. She indicated a roughly circular region near a small hill. We need to know why. Rose leaned forward, studying the map intently. Any theories? Several, Mei Lin replied. Could be a territorial dispute between clans. Could be they found something they want to keep to themselves. Could be nothing at all. That's what you're going to find out. She looked at each of us in turn, her golden eyes assessing. This is a reconnaissance mission only. You go in, observe, document, and return. No engagement unless absolutely necessary for survival. Is that clear? Crystal, I said, nodding. The others murmured their agreement. Even Clana, who had finally achieved something resembling full consciousness. You'll be equipped with standard reconnaissance gear, mana-dampening cloaks, short-range comms, documentation devices. The mission area is beyond our surveillance network, so you'll be on your own once you cross the marker. Mei Lin's expression remained neutral, but her next words carried weight. This is a low-risk assignment, but low risk doesn't mean no risk. The frontier is unpredictable. She gestured to Private Rogies, who stepped forward with a tablet. The detailed briefing is here. Review it thoroughly before departure. You leave at 0900. With that, she straightened, signaling the end of the briefing. Questions? Extraction protocol? I asked. Standard emergency beacon if you run into trouble. Otherwise, return to checkpoint Delta by 1700 hours. If you're not back by then, we send in a retrieval team. Her lips curved in what might have been a smile on anyone else. Try not to need it. Paperwork is excessive. Rachel raised her hand, which seemed oddly formal given the setting, but entirely in character for her. Are there any specific artifacts or phenomena we should be looking for? Mei Lin considered this for a moment. The ogre clans typically avoid areas where miasma concentrations are high. If they're steering clear of this region, it could indicate a leak or surge. Your Saintess abilities might be particularly useful in detecting that. Rachel nodded, looking pleased to have her skills specifically acknowledged. If there are no further questions, you're dismissed to prepare. Rogies will show you to the equipment room. As we turned to leave, Mei Lin added one final comment. Nightingale. I paused, looking back at her. This is a simple mission. Keep it that way. I nodded, recognizing the subtle warning for what it was. Clearly, my reputation had preceded me. An hour later, we were suited up and ready to depart. The reconnaissance gear was high quality, lightweight armor beneath mana-dampening cloaks that would help mask our presence from both conventional and magical detection. The documentation devices were compact but powerful, capable of recording visual, audio, and mana signatures simultaneously. This is actually exciting, Rachel whispered as we approached the checkpoint that would take us beyond the frontier's defensive perimeter. She looked different in the field gear, less like the Radiant Saintess and more like the capable combatant I knew she could be when necessary. It's a glorified nature walk, Clana muttered, though even she seemed more alert now, her fingers absently tracing spell patterns in the air. A habit she developed to keep her casting reflexes sharp. Rose adjusted her equipment one final time, every movement precise. Nature walk or not, stay alert. Ogres may be predictable in their patrols, but they're unpredictable in their reactions. The checkpoint was a reinforced outpost at the edge of the frontier's defensive line, the last bit of human civilization before the wilderness beyond. A small team of soldiers manned it, monitoring the border for any signs of incursion. The officer in charge, a weathered woman with lieutenant's bars and eyes that had seen more than they should, gave us a final once-over. Follow your waypoints, she advised, pointing to the navigation device I'd been given as team leader. The path will keep you clear of known patrol routes. Maintain calm silence unless absolutely necessary. Sound travels further than you'd think out there. With a final nod, she activated the gate in the perimeter fence, creating an opening just large enough for us to pass through single file. Good hunting, she said, though we weren't hunting anything. Or so we thought. The frontier beyond the perimeter was both exactly what I expected and somehow totally different. The forest wasn't dark and foreboding as stories often portrayed the wilderness. It was vibrant, alive with colors and sounds that had a primal energy to them. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. Birds called to each other overhead. If not for the knowledge that we were in potentially hostile territory, it might have been peaceful. "It's beautiful," Rachel murmured, voicing my thoughts. "And dangerous," Rose added, ever practical. "Stay focused." We moved in formation. I took point with Rose and Rachel behind me, and Clanna covering our rear. For someone who seemed perpetually exhausted, Clanna moved with surprising grace through the undergrowth, one hand always poised to cast a defensive spell at the first sign of trouble. The navigation device led us along a winding path that avoided open areas when possible, keeping us under the cover of the forest canopy. According to the map, we were making good time toward our objective. About 3 kilometers in, Rachel suddenly paused, her head tilting slightly as if listening to something only she could hear. "What is it?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "I'm not sure," she replied, her brow furrowed in concentration. "There's something off about the mana currents here." We all stopped, instinctively forming a defensive circle as Rachel closed her eyes, extending her senses. As a saintess, her ability to detect and purify corrupted mana was unparalleled among our group. "It's subtle," she said finally, "but there's a pattern to the flow that isn't natural. It's being directed." "Toward our objective?" Rose asked. Rachel nodded slowly. "I think so, like water flowing downhill but deliberately channeled." That was interesting. Mana flowing naturally tended to create random patterns, following the path of least resistance. Directed flow meant intelligence, purpose. It meant someone or something was manipulating the energy. Chapter 299. Let's proceed with extra caution, I decided. Clanna, can you prepare a detection spell? Something passive that won't give away our position. Clanna nodded, her fingers already weaving intricate patterns in the air. Her gift, spell synergy, allowed her to cast multiple spells simultaneously and blend them together in ways most mages couldn't achieve. Despite her perpetually sleepy demeanor, she was one of the most skilled spellcasters in our year. "Passive detection grid, layered with mana echo," she murmured, her eyes half closed in concentration. Faint blue lines of light briefly appeared around us before fading from visibility. "It'll ping if anything larger than a rabbit comes within 50 meters. We continued forward, moving more slowly now, more deliberately. The forest grew denser as we approached the area marked on our map, the undergrowth thicker, as if nature itself was trying to hide something. It turned out to be nothing more dramatic than a recent landslide that had exposed a mineral deposit known to be toxic to ogres. The strange mana currents Rachel detected were simply the natural result of the earth being disturbed. Clanna's spell grid confirmed there was nothing unnatural about the site, just a geological event that made the area inhospitable to the local tribes. As we completed our documentation and prepared to head back, I noticed something unusual on a tree near our position. Fresh marks carved into the bark, 3 diagonal slashes followed by a horizontal line. The pattern was precisely made, too deliberate to be random animal claw marks. "What's that?" Rachel asked, noticing me examining the tree. "Trail marking, maybe," I said, though something about it felt off. I took an image with the documentation device, almost as an afterthought. The journey back to the outpost was uneventful, and Marshal Maylin seemed satisfied with our report. As we were finishing our debrief, I mentioned the marking. 3 slashes and a horizontal line. Carved recently. Maylin's expression changed for just a fraction of a second, so briefly I almost missed it. A tightening around her eyes, a subtle tension in her jaw. "Show me," she said, her tone carefully neutral. When I displayed the image, she studied it in silence before closing the file with a deliberate tap. "Is it significant?" I asked. "It's a trail marker," she confirmed. "Used by higher-ranking members of the Savage Communion when they travel without an entourage. You performed well today. A simple mission completed successfully." Malin's words had been the sort of ambiguous that made people nervous. Not the ship is sinking sort of nervous, but definitely you might want to double-check the lifeboat's nervous. She'd mentioned high-ranking Savage Communion members in the vicinity with all the enthusiasm of someone who'd found a spider the size of a fist behind their couch and then lost sight of it. Which, in Maylin terms, probably meant something like an orc chieftain, an ogre chief, or, if the universe was feeling particularly comedic, a cardinal from the Savage Communion. None of those were great options. The kind of figures you didn't so much fight as survive long enough for someone else to take over. Preferably someone with more firepower and significantly better life insurance. Still, I wasn't afraid. That wasn't bravado. Not entirely, anyway. It was more statistical optimism. We had Mei Lin with us. Peak immortal ranker. A walking magical catastrophe second only to Valen Ashbluff in the Western continent, and stronger than the Tower Master of the Ebony Tower, which really said something, considering the Tower Master could probably blow up a moon if he ever got in a bad mood. Mei Lin could probably blow up 2 moons and have enough energy left over to order a coffee. Non-dairy with just a hint of cinnamon. The frontier outpost itself seemed to recognize Mei Lin's significance. Soldiers straightened a little more when she passed, conversations quieted, and even the automated defense systems seemed to hum a bit more attentively. Fear wasn't quite the right word for what they felt. It was more like the instinctive respect you might have for a thunderstorm or an active volcano. Natural forces that could annihilate you without particularly meaning to. For now, though, there were no exploding moons. We had completed the preliminary task Mei Lin had given us. Some kind of glorified border scouting operation that was about as dangerous as poking a hedgehog with a stick if the hedgehog was asleep and mildly anemic. Nothing had gone wrong, nobody died, and Klana only fell asleep once while standing up, which was a personal best. She'd claimed afterward that she was monitoring the tactical situation through passive sensory input, which was Klana speak for, I can nap and scout simultaneously. After returning to camp, we found a quiet spot behind the barracks. A little patch of cracked stone and synthetic moss that passed for a park in these parts. The kind of place where soldiers pretended they were on a picnic while surrounded by automated turrets and anti-orc barrier nodes. Someone had made a valiant attempt to plant flowers, tough, radiation-resistant blossoms that thrived in the sort of conditions that would make most plant life file for immediate retirement. Rachel leaned back against my shoulder, eyes closed, humming faintly. The tune was something old, a folk song from the eastern continent, though she'd probably claim it was a sacred hymn if anyone asked. Rose sat across from us, legs crossed, doing something graceful with a pocket mirror and a portable manicure device that probably cost more than a small spaceship. The device hummed with more technological sophistication than most battlefield weapons. And Klana was laying on the ground, arms folded behind her head, blinking up at the sky like she was waiting for it to blink back. A nearby soldier had walked past her twice, clearly debating whether to check if she was dead, or just observing her natural habitat. You're not actually asleep, are you? I asked her. No, she said, without moving. Just practicing. For what? Surviving this insanity by conserving my energy. She wiggled her fingers vaguely toward the sky. You know, the stuff that keeps the rest of you moving around like caffeinated hamsters. I chuckled, tossing her a ration bar. She caught it without looking, her hand moving with surprising precision for someone who appeared to be auditioning for the role of corpse. You're a very lazy soldier. I'm efficient, she said, unwrapping it with the delicate care usually reserved for defusing bombs. Same thing. The less you move, the less energy you waste, the longer you survive. It's basic mathematics. Admit it, I said. You're starting to enjoy our company. She squinted over at me, one eye opening just enough to suggest mild interest. You're tolerable. Rachel talks too much. Rose is too shiny. But you're all right. For someone who seems determined to find trouble in places most people would actively avoid. It was the Klana version of friendship. High praise indeed from someone who usually expressed affection by not actively walking away from you mid-conversation. I gave her a slow nod. High praise. She grinned faintly, the expression looking almost foreign on her perpetually tired face. Just don't die, all right? Paperwork for deceased team members is excessive, and I'd have to be awake to file it. Not planning on it. Rachel shifted against my shoulder, her golden hair catching the afternoon light in a way that seemed deliberately photogenic. This is nice, she said softly. Almost makes you forget we're sitting on the edge of civilization, surrounded by creatures that would happily use our bones as toothpicks. Your optimism is inspiring, Rose remarked dryly, not looking up from her manicure. The tiny device in her hand emitted a soft beep of completion. Though I must admit, this assignment has been less hazardous than expected. Don't jinx it, Klana muttered, her eyes closed again. Universe loves a challenge. As if on cue, a messenger approached. A young private who looked like he'd been chosen for the task through a particularly brutal game of not-it among his peers. He saluted stiffly, his gaze darting between us like he wasn't quite sure which academy student might spontaneously explode. Captain Nightingale, he said, addressing me with the careful tone of someone handling unexploded ordnance. Grand Marshal Maylin requests your team's presence tomorrow at 0600 hours. Full field gear, prepared for extended reconnaissance. Any specifics? I asked. The private swallowed visibly. No, sir, the marshal just said, and I quote, "Tell them to be ready for anything and not to bring anything they can't afford to lose." With that cheerful message delivered, he retreated with the brisk efficiency of someone who had successfully completed a suicide mission and wasn't about to press his luck. Well, Rose said into the ensuing silence. That sounds ominous. Could be routine, Rachel offered, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it either. Clanna sighed deeply. This is exactly what I was talking about. Universe. Challenge. Immediate response. She sat up with the reluctance of continental drift. I'm going to take a preemptive nap. Wake me when we're about to die. The peace didn't last. The next day, Maylin summoned us again, exactly as the messenger had warned. She took us with her. No reason given. Just said we were to accompany her on patrol. Which, again, wasn't how things usually went. Grand Marshals didn't do patrols either. Not unless they were expecting something that couldn't be left to people who hadn't leveled entire fortresses with a sneeze. It was like having the general personally inspect an anthill that had been giving the regular troops trouble. We followed her into the wastes, riding in a hovertruck shaped like a beetle and sounding like it had asthma. The vehicle protested each elevation change with a wheezing noise that suggested it was contemplating early retirement. The landscape outside was a patchwork of scrubland and rocky outcroppings, occasionally interrupted by the twisted remains of trees that had evolved to survive in conditions that would make most plant life file a formal complaint. Rachel, Rose, and Clanna rode in the back compartment while I sat up front with Maylin. She drove in silence, her golden eyes fixed on the horizon, occasionally checking a device on her wrist that displayed information in a format I couldn't quite decipher. The silence wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it had weight to it, the kind of silence that comes before important words. Eventually, as we stopped near a ridgeline that offered a panoramic view of the frontier's edge, she pulled me aside. Walk with me, Arthur. I did, following her to a rocky outcropping that overlooked a vast expanse of borderland. From here, you could see where the controlled territory ended and the wilder regions began. A transition marked not by any physical barrier but by a subtle shift in the landscape itself. Something about the quality of the light, perhaps, or the way the vegetation grew. You've studied necromancy, she said, her voice as flat as ever. Some, I nodded. It's one of my focuses, yes. But I'm not purely a necromancer. That's fine, she said. I'm not either. You know what necromancy really is? Raising the dead, I offered. She snorted, the sound almost startlingly human coming from someone who generally presented herself with all the emotional range of a particularly stoic rock. No. It's control. Understanding. It's the discipline of keeping things from falling apart when they already should have. Necromancy is balance, Arthur. Not just bones and corpses. It's memory, legacy, structure in decay. And you? You have potential. I blinked, surprised by the assessment. Maylin wasn't known for casual compliments or mentorship speeches. Is that why you brought me? Part of it, she said, her eyes scanning the horizon with the practiced vigilance of someone who had survived countless battles by never assuming safety. The other part is that I have a very bad feeling, which, coming from someone like Maylin, was the equivalent of being told by a dragon that they smelled smoke. Not just concerning, downright apocalyptic. Bad feeling as in we're being watched. And I wanted more of a reason to stop him. As soon as her words dropped, so did the sky. Chapter 300. I've always believed in being carefully ambiguous when delivering bad news. Not so vague that people think everything's fine, but not so clear that they panic. It's a delicate balance, like telling someone to check their safety equipment without mentioning you've spotted a bomb. So when I mentioned high-ranking Savage Communion members in the vicinity to those Academy kids, I kept my tone neutral. Professional. The kind of voice you use when discussing slightly concerning weather patterns rather than the potential arrival of genocidal maniacs. These weren't just any Academy students, either. Mythos Academy's finest. A fact they wore like invisible badges, visible to anyone with enough perception to see past their youth. Arthur Nightingale, almost integration rank, with a gift that made necromancers twice his age look incompetent. The Saintess, Rachel, whose healing abilities could bring someone back from the brink of death with a touch. Rose, with her reality-bending paradox manipulation. Even Clanna, perpetually half asleep but capable of layering spells in ways that defied conventional understanding. Talented, yes, but still children playing at being soldiers. The Western continent had been my responsibility for a long time now. Second only to Valen Ashbluff himself in raw power, I had earned every scar, every rank, every whispered legend. I brought the academy students with me on patrol, not standard procedure by any measure. Grand marshals don't do patrols. We coordinate them, plan them, review reports from them. We don't personally trudge through borderlands unless we're expecting something that requires our direct attention. But I needed them with me today. Not for their protection, that would be absurd, but because their presence would force me to make the right choice when the moment came. The hover truck wheezed asthmatically as we traveled, its systems protesting every bump and dip in the uneven terrain. Frontier equipment was always like this. Functional but complaining, like a soldier who does their job perfectly while grumbling the entire time. I pulled Arthur aside when we reached the ridgeline. Of the four, he showed the most promise in necromancy, my own specialty. Not that he was purely a necromancer. His talents were more diverse than that. But he understood the fundamentals in a way that suggested intuition rather than mere study. "Walk with me, Arthur," I said, keeping my voice neutral. He followed without question. "Good. Not all brilliance comes with obedience." "You've studied necromancy," I stated. Not a question. I'd read his file, watched him practice. "Some," he nodded. "It's one of my focuses, yes. But I'm not purely a necromancer." "That's fine," I told him. "I'm not either." I paused, considering how to explain. "You know what necromancy really is?" "Raising the dead," he offered, giving the textbook answer. Couldn't help but snort at that. So many years of teaching, and they still started with the most simplistic understanding. "No. It's control. Understanding. It's the discipline of keeping things from falling apart when they already should have. Necromancy is balance, Arthur. Not just bones and corpses. It's memory, legacy, structure in decay. And you? You have potential." He blinked, surprise flickering across his face. "Is that why you brought me?" "Part of it," I admitted. "The other part is that I have a very bad feeling." His expression told me he understood the weight of that statement. Good. The boy wasn't an idiot. "Bad feeling as in?" he prompted. "As in we're being watched. And I want someone with me who can raise a wall of corpses and make it polite." I allowed myself a small smile. Barely there, but genuine. The boy had earned that much honesty, at least. The truth was, I hadn't slept properly since seeing that marking in their report. 3 diagonal slashes with a horizontal line, the Axe King's personal trail marker. I knew exactly what it meant. The Axe King himself was moving along our frontier. I immediately contacted Valen Ashbluff, the king of the Western continent. The only being on this continent who could face the Axe King with certainty of victory. The message I received in return was polite, diplomatic, and utterly useless. Valen was halfway across the world on some crucial diplomatic mission. He would return as soon as circumstances permitted. Circumstances. As if the Axe King's presence along our frontier was a minor scheduling inconvenience rather than an existential threat. I brought these students with me for a reason. Not because they could help against what was coming, they couldn't, but because their presence would ensure I made the right choice when the moment came. I would do whatever was necessary to ensure they survived. To ensure the future they represented would have a chance. I felt it before I saw anything. A ripple in the ambient mana, like a stone dropped into a still pond. Then the temperature plummeted, the air itself seeming to recoil from what was approaching. Even the ground beneath our feet trembled slightly. "Get back to the truck," I told Arthur, my voice calm despite everything. "Take the others and go. Now." To his credit, he didn't waste time asking questions. He saw something in my face that told him everything he needed to know. "Marshal," he began. "That's an order, Captain," I said firmly. "Go." He hesitated for just a moment, then nodded and turned, running back toward where the others waited. I turned to face the approaching presence, drawing on my gift. Deep dark swirled around me, responding to my call. Not just from recent deaths but from the accumulated weight of all the battles this land had witnessed. The western frontier was saturated with death. It was my perfect battlefield. The air split open about 50 meters away, not a portal in the conventional sense, but a tear in reality itself. Through it stepped a figure that could only be the Axe King. He was massive, nearly 2 meters tall, his skin covered in ritual scars that glowed with internal power. His armor was crafted from the bones of powerful creatures and metals that shouldn't exist in nature. And his axe, the weapon that gave him his title, was a monstrous thing of black metal that seemed to devour light.